Hello and welcome. So, today's audio is going to be a brief history of my story so far, and I will try and keep this as concise as possible because our stories, our history is only relatively important. We all have a story, we all have a history, and if learning about mine helps in regards to connecting, it certainly helps me when I listen to spiritual teachers and I know a little bit about their background. So, the common question is where to start, and I think I will start at the age of 15, which for me, in regards to my story, was a particular time that I will never forget. Just to summarize my childhood, I was raised with an older brother, and I had a happy childhood, and I don't like to use this word, but I guess you could say a normal childhood. There were no traumas, no specific events that affected my growing up, so in that respect I could say it was normal. So at the age of 15, my parents went through a divorce, and the reason why that time was so difficult, besides the fact of parents splitting up and the effects of that happening, was there was a lot of anger during that period. I think one of the reasons why I don't shout or I rarely get angry was because I saw so much anger between my parents, especially during that time when the things began getting more intense. So I witnessed a lot of angry faces, I heard a lot of angry words, and as a child I must have interpreted that as something I did not want to do, something I did not want to partake in, and it must have absorbed very deeply because I have only lost my temper or gotten very angry less than a handful of times in my life. And I think I saw the ugliness of the anger and the pain before, during, and after the anger. And I must have made a connection at that young age that that's not what I wanted for myself. Another reason why that was such a significant time was because when that event happened, I found myself very alone. I didn't feel connected to my parents as I once did. I didn't feel part of a family, and I remember during that time I listened to a lot of angry music for many of my teenage years, and that was my process of dealing with my anger, my pain. And for a time, the relationship with my parents was fractured, and in some ways it's never been the same, and I don't believe it will ever be the same as it once was. So I won't go into details of certain things that happened that may have fractured my relationship with my parents or affected my relationship with them. I think just to say that I felt very alone when this event of my parents' divorce happened. I think that sums it up. A few years after this event, I continued my studies. I guess I never stopped my studies, but I gradually worked my way through school, the rest of school, which I didn't do too well in. I got very low grades in high school, and that seemed to motivate me to work harder. I was disappointed at what I had achieved, so I worked hard during my college and university days, and I came out with a degree from that hard work, and soon I was working, and I joined a graduate scheme for an IT company. It's kind of like an apprenticeship where they pay you for, of course, working there, but also learning on the job. And the company I worked for was quite an established company, so along with my degree, I now had a good job and a potentially good, secure future working there. So this was now in my early 20s, and this will be the next, I guess, milestone in my life where I met somebody, a partner, a life partner, and I soon ended up leaving the IT company I worked for. So after a couple of years, I met somebody and they lived halfway across the world. So I ended up leaving this company and traveling across the world to be with this person, and so in some ways it was a new life for me. Living in a new country, being in a new relationship. So and the country I moved to was the US, and the next few years were spent building my life there, working to get my work permit, and soon I got married there as well. And a year into the marriage, there were difficulties, and this resulted in a separation. So after a couple of years living in the United States, I relocated back to the UK, and as you can imagine, along with this was a lot of emotional baggage, lots of mental, emotional content I was working through. And just a quick side note, the mind, thoughts, emotions can be extremely complex. They can intertwine to many different memories and views and opinions. And so I was in quite an emotional state when I returned to the UK, and it was at that point I continued to write. I had picked up fiction writing while at university and sporadically continued that during my time, and I can use that as almost as a crutch when I came back to the UK. And after a year of writing, I wrote short stories and finished off novels I had started before. I relocated again, this time to another city, a couple of hours away. And this was to be my fresh start, to have my own place, to be working again. So and 6 months of living and working in this particular city, my work became more stressful. The type of work I did was working on the phones, and I was a business banker, So people would call in for various questions on their financial accounts, and I would service their requests. But it was at that time where I acknowledged that I may be depressed, or I was dealing with depression. And I won't go too much into discussing depression because many people have many different views on depression. One person may look at depression as a disease, another person may look at depression as simply a state of mind or a period where your mind is in a depression or immersed in depressive thoughts. And depression can range from a short period of time to a significant period of time. And when I acknowledged this in myself, it was easy to see that I was perhaps depressed since my parents' divorce. I just simply didn't recognize, or I guess label, my feelings and my behaviors. But all of that time being alone and having no self-esteem and empty days and dealing with many mood swings, and the list of symptoms, I guess, is very long. And so I find myself in a situation where the depression had intensified, and this was partly to do with my history of my parents' divorce, how I've lived my life up until then, and of course my own separation from my partner, and now struggling in my job and living in a city, a new city. So during that time I relocated again and moved to a different city, a city where I had some familiar people there, which was the main reason. And I began working again in a job that involved being on the phones, but I thought it would be something different than my previous business banker job. But after a certain amount of time, maybe 7 or 8 months, again I found this work too much for me. And it reached a stage where I was having heart palpitations, so my heart was beating extremely fast during one night after a very difficult day at this job. And I realized then that I would not be able to continue working this job. And all of a sudden, I made the decision to move back to my mother's house, living back home with a parent. And I remember at the time I had a great idea that I would focus all of my energy, all of my attention on my writing. and this will be my career, publishing novels. So I packed up my things with the help of my older brother and moved back home, and I dove into writing, self-publishing, marketing. And a certain amount of time passed, and maybe it was a thought that came to me or a feeling, but there was a realization I didn't have what it took to self-publish my work, which involved financial investment to work with editors, graphic designers for the book covers. It involved a great deal of time marketing, promoting yourself as an author on social media. And at that point, the depression intensified even more. There was another failure. First it was my marriage, and then my jobs. I was working. My new life had failed, and now my plan of being a self-published writer, that had failed as well. And I perhaps didn't think of it in those clear terms. I just simply reached a breaking point. And at this point, thoughts such as suicide, of not wanting to be here, were a regular occurrence. And soon I joined a support group that I still attend to this day, although not as often. I attend once in a while, and this support group is to help people who are dealing with their own mental health challenges. And alongside the support group, I attended counselling for a year and a half or so. And so it has been about 5 years since I had returned home from living in a new city. And while I was in university, I was always interested in psychology, how to make my life better, and at some point during that time I was introduced to a man called Tony Robbins, who is a life strategist, I guess. I think he prefers to be called that than anything to do with motivation, but he provides strategies for living life, a strategy to have the body you want, a strategy to have the emotions to live a certain lifestyle, to achieve goals. to have the relationships you want, personal relationships, friends, family, and also intimate relationships. So several years ago I attended a seminar of his, 3-day seminar where there's almost an immersion in these tools and techniques he offers. And these were a big part of my life, these tools and techniques of understanding my psychology, my body. And over the years I created many routines and schedules for things I would do each day. But soon this faded. The impact or the use of these tools and techniques faded away. And it was about, perhaps it's been a year or maybe less, that my older brother introduced me to a book called The Power of Now that he was reading and which he said had a significant impact. And he mentioned that the author of this book, Eckhart Tolle, who, if you have listened previously, then you have certainly heard his name, that Eckhart Tolle had videos online as well. So I immediately went to the videos. I did purchase the book, but it was the videos that seemed to have a significant impact on me. And I am a man of faith, so I follow or am part of a religion. And this has certainly helped me throughout my life. But the last few years, even with that, there was a disconnect, or I wasn't relating to it as I once did. And so when I came across Eckhart's teachings, they reminded me of what I had learned in my religion, and a lot of these teachings are there for you to practice, whether you're religious or not. It's not there to replace anything. If you have a religion or way of life, then these teachings from Eckhart that I had learnt simply complemented my lifestyle. And so I immersed myself, not consciously. I didn't have a plan to think I will listen to a certain amount of audios each day and so on. It was just simply a natural immersion of his teachings. And soon I came across Mooji, who, again, my brother mentioned him, and so for the last year I have been watching, listening and reading their material, and I have found a new way of living. And I truly mean living, not a new way of thinking, but a new way of living, a new way of being. And in some ways it's not a learning, it's more of a uncovering of what I already was. And their teachings were simply pointers, pointing. And I would like to say that their teachings are all pointers, but their teachings are not the inner eye. Eckhart Tolle uses the example of a sign that says, "Roam this way." And he used the example of just looking at that sign, but not actually going to where they are pointing to. So Mooji and Eckhart offer many pointings, guided meditations, but it is us who have to go to that destination. Nobody can do it for us. So this is a brief story, so I think all of the suffering I have endured, and I don't mean to say that in a way that I have experienced more suffering than most. Absolutely not. That's impossible to say, and my belief is that as human beings, we all encounter suffering. It's as simple as that. We all do. But I feel that the suffering has helped me as listening to these teachings. There is an urgency to want to go to this destination, to want to be in being. Because if your life at the moment is very good in a situational level, and you have a good job, you have a happy relationship, then in those circumstances you may not have the urgency or the thirst to want to be free, because your mind is absorbed in pleasure. So I'm grateful for the sufferings. And just to bring you into my present life situation, I'm still living here with my parent, with my mother, and it is an incredibly challenging environment to be in. as my mother is somebody who at this very moment is identified with mind. So there is a lot of suffering here that I see on a daily basis, and there is a lot of unconsciousness here, and that is having an effect on me. In some ways I see it as a spiritual practice, and that's how I try and approach it, but there are days when it becomes extremely challenging as well. So that's my current situation. And I could have made this video about 10 hours long with many details and stories of what happened, but I feel that the drama and those details of certain events are quite unimportant. My life story is unimportant, but I hope it serves to hear it. And I'm sure I have missed bits out unintentionally that if I feel it serves and I remember at another time, then I may talk about that as well. And I'm sure in future audios I will certainly reference real life examples of my life as well. So I'm relatively new to this practice or this way of being, which again is not accurate because we are it. We are part of this universe that is all unfolding. And I say that from partly from a place of knowing, when being in that state, when simply being, you transcend the thoughts and there is just a knowing that there is no little you and your life, there is just consciousness, and I am just a manifestation of that consciousness. So that's my story so far, and I hope it helps in some way to know more about me as I share my experiences of presence and my practices, and to help anyone that's listening here as well. And I would just simply like to thank you for joining me here, and I wish you well, and I will speak to you again soon.